Story 1. Coming out of the emergency room around 2:30 to 3 o'clock with an ex. There is a playground right across from the hospital, and a large man emerged from the shadows of the playground and asked if we had just come out of the hospital. We said yes, and he said he had as well and that he was having a really bad night. He asked if we would sit and talk with him. There was a bench in the playground still in the light, very close and visible from the road. We were not in a rush, so we said okay. We went to the bench and he talked about how hard everything was for him. He said he had no friends and that we seemed like nice people. Then he said he would feel a lot better if we could go talk in the woods just to the left of us in the park. I told him I was sorry, but it was late and we had to go. He kept trying to convince us that talking in the woods would help him feel better. We were very young, just 18 and 19, had no money, purses, or possessions on us to suggest otherwise, and I still think the man might have been a serial killer. I don't think he intended to rob us because we were young with nothing on us, and we were in Florida. There were plenty of wealthier people he could have tried. I am convinced he must have been a killer. What else could I think after that interaction? Story 2. This is an odd one. I was in the hospital suffering at an unbearable level. The doctors could do nothing to stop my pain. They tried morphine and fentanyl. I was struggling with whether to end it. The doctors said that, given what I was going through, I might consider it, but to stay strong. I eventually passed out and felt someone in the room with me. I sat up and opened my eyes. My deceased nephew, grandmother, and grandfather were standing at the end of the bed, looking at me. In just moments, they were gone. That's when I knew I would be okay. I have now been suffering for a year with nerve damage. Tomorrow I have gamma knife surgery at the Houston Medical Center. I know I will be okay. Story 3. I looked through the kitchen window while getting a glass of water at 2 a.m. My face was not the only one staring back. My father had to chase the man out of the garden. Story 4. When my mother died that same year, my oldest sister found out she was pregnant. My brother-in-law called my father one night, saying there were problems with the baby. I had a dream that night where my mother was talking to me, but I could not hear what she was saying. Then she turned to consoling my sister while she was crying. All the while, this was happening in a bright, heavenly background. The next day, my brother-in-law called and said the baby had died inside my sister. We buried her on top of our mother. I still wish I knew what my mother was trying to tell me. It was a completely silent dream. She later had 2 healthy girls. The baby was also a girl. Story 5. I was home alone, and the front door unlocked itself. There was a loud click as the deadbolt turned. I thought I was losing my mind until my neighbor told me someone was trying doorknobs up and down the block. Story 6. I went to get a snack in the middle of the night. The place where we keep our fruit is in front of a window. When I went to get a banana, I saw the face of a person peering into the house. It seems that seeing me scared him away. Story 7. I went to work as a Hooters waitress one day, and everyone was looking at me strangely. The manager said he needed to talk to me in the back room. I asked, "What did I do?" He handed me an envelope with my name on it. Inside were 3 or 4 pages, front and back, describing how he remembered me as a child, how sad he was when I moved away, and how he had just gotten out of prison and recognized me at Walmart a couple of nights before, where I had indeed been. The letter contained ramblings about how he had always loved me, even as a child, making it clear he was much older than me, along with random accurate details about my life. There had been a windowless painter's van parked in our lot off and on for a couple of weeks at that point that none of us had thought about until I received that letter. Needless to say, the managers insisted that I be escorted to my car after my shifts from then on. Story 8. Locked in the shower building after an event at a fairgrounds, soaking wet and naked. No lights, no way out. Story 9. I told this story years ago when I first joined Reddit. I used to work at a hotel, and after we cleaned the rooms for the day, we took out our garbage. The bins were behind the hotel. When we got out there, a man was dumping stuff into the garbage, mostly women's clothing. He saw us, got in his car, and left. We came back with more garbage, and he was there again throwing stuff out. We went back inside, and I asked my manager if we should call the police. She said no. Years later, I told this story to my uncle, who was a police officer at the time. He said we probably should have called the police because it could have been evidence of a crime he was getting rid of, not necessarily murder, but more likely breaking and entering, according to my uncle. Story 10. One day, sewing needles just appeared on my porch. I have 2 toddlers, so when I first saw one, I was alarmed and wondered how it got there. We don't sew, and we live a good distance from any other house. The next day, I found 2 more, this time inside my house right after you entered the door. I was very creeped out, but threw them away and carried on. As time passed, I found another needle, then about 5 at a time. One day, I opened my front door to find around 30 needles scattered across my porch. I was on my hands and knees every morning for a week by my front door, trying to make sure my kids wouldn't step on any. Every time I looked, I found about 3 to 5 needles. It was very strange. This continued for about 8 days. I cleaned up every needle I could find, but the next day I would inevitably spot another, leading to more and more. By the end, there were so many needles. I never discovered how the needles ended up on my porch or doorway. I did move afterward. I tried to convince myself a neighbor might have dropped some, but there are brick walls between the houses. The needles would have had to fly over the wall to land on my porch, yet they were only on the porch. None were found in my long driveway between my neighbor's brick wall and my porch, only specifically on the porch and a few inside the house. It was really bizarre. If the wind had blown them over, they probably would have all appeared at once. My house is set far back from the street and spaced out from my neighbor's. The brick walls made it even more difficult for the needles to get there. I have no clue how they ended up there. Story 11. When I was 13, we were staying at a family vacation house with many people, including family, friends, and cousins. I woke up in the middle of the night to someone touching me with their hands under my boxers. I turned the other way while pretending to still be asleep and unaware of what had happened. The person got up and left the room. To this day, I do not know who it was. Story 12. I was driving to work one night. At the time, I was a security officer working the overnight shift. After I stopped to get gas at a station near my home, I noticed a car that seemed to be following me. My commute was about 25 minutes, and I became more suspicious as I made various turns. The car kept turning as well and trailing me. I began driving down the side streets toward my job site and knew that once the car started making the same turn, it was no coincidence. I worked at a very strange industrial warehouse, and it was 10 p.m. I drove to the nearest emergency room, and as soon as I turned in, the car sped off. I have never been so terrified in my life and have been hypervigilant ever since. Story 13. One night, I stepped away from washing dishes to retrieve something from my darkened bedroom. From that window, I noticed my next-door neighbor sitting and watching my kitchen window. The next-door neighbor was a peeping Tom. Story 14. When I was 13, an adult man crossed the street and started a conversation with me. I was very cautious. Finally, he said he had to leave so I would not think he was inappropriate. Then he said nice breasts and walked away. Story 15. Making funeral arrangements for my husband after we were told he had 2 months to live. I am just grateful our adult daughters were with me. His doctor was accurate as well. Forget cancer. Story 16. I had just woken up from a nap. My bedroom door was closed, and so was the front door to my apartment. I heard a knock at the front door. Then someone put a key in the lock and unlocked it. A lady opened the door, said hello 3 times, and then shut the door. I was frozen in fear and did not respond. I was like, what just happened? To this day, I have no idea what it was. I asked maintenance and the front office if they had entered, and they said no. Story 17. A man followed me around a laundromat. I took my wet clothes out of the washer and left. Another time, I was out with my dog, letting him go potty one more time before bed. Someone drove slowly past me, turned around, and came back to drive past me again. When they reached the end of the street, they backed up. I was running to my house at this point. They pulled into my driveway, sat there for a minute, and then left. I did not sleep well that night. Story 18. I live in a university dormitory. One night at 3 a.m., I woke up after 2 hours of sleep and went one floor down to iron my clothes for the next day. It was very windy and stormy that night. The doors and windows were banging loudly, and almost everyone was asleep except me. I was ironing my clothes, and there was a large window in front of me. I heard a child of about 5 years old laughing and playing in the rain outside. I wondered how there could be a child on the university dormitory grounds at 3 a.m. The voice became clearer as I listened closely, and at one point it seemed to come from behind me. I ran back to my room and told everyone about it the next day, but no one believed me. Story 19. Al-Qaeda stalked my family while camping in the wadis outside of Riyadh in 2003. We recognized them on top of the canyons in positions, but a freak Shamal sandstorm, which sounded like a jet engine, plus a flash flood, prevented us from leaving that night. At 3 a.m., when headlights appeared near our camp, my dad looked back before unzipping the tent where my sister and I, aged 13, were. There was a silent understanding that he might not come back and that we should use the sound of gunshots as cover, a scenario we had discussed beforehand. Fortunately, it was the Bedouin who came to warn us to escape no matter what. A shootout then ensued involving the Saudi Defense Force. It is not the creepiest story, but it was the first that came to mind. Story 20. A confused buyer from Facebook Marketplace showed up at my back door. I had never met the person before. She asked in French if we were selling a phone. I said, "No, I don't have a phone for sale." My dad found out she was scammed. Whoever scammed her gave her our address. I was surprised. Probably some mysterious profile. Story 21. I was 20 years old at the time and wearing my name tag from a massive amusement park in Orlando where I had been working. The tag had my first name and the city I went to school in. I went into a grocery store quickly, and a creepy employee there approached me and started talking. I was polite. He was a bit older, and I didn't want to be rude. I don't remember the conversation, but it was superficial. Very early the next morning, around 2 or 3 a.m., I received a friend request on Facebook from him and notifications that he had liked all my public content. His page consisted almost entirely of sexually explicit, sexually violent, and extremely aggressive content. I was absolutely terrified. I hadn't been very careful online because I was 20, and it was the early 2010s. Because I was there for an internship, there were only 3 apartment complexes where I could live. I was sure he could figure out which one I lived in, and I relied on public transportation from that complex. He messaged me several times. Eventually, I only went shopping with a friend at a different store because I was terrified of running into him. Story 22. Not really the creepiest, more like just pure confusion. It was my late grandmother's birthday, around midnight. I was lying in bed, on the phone with my boyfriend. I lifted my head from the pillow and saw a bright light travel across my room. Story 23. I went on a haunted tour in Key West. We entered a building where the tour guide asked us not to take any photos because the spirits did not like it. I accidentally took a photo with my leg, and the photo is crazy. It is extremely distorted, nothing like a photo an Apple camera would have taken 7 years ago, and it still scares me when I see the photo. Story 24. My daughter has a rocking horse in her room. After midnight, I would hear slamming and footsteps that were way too loud to be hers. She was only a year old. I checked her camera, and she was asleep. I moved the horse out of her room, and the noises stopped. A few days later, my newborn would look at the side of my room and laugh and smile, even though it was just a plain wall. Then I would take my daughter there after her bath to play, and she would point at the spot, get scared, and ask, "What's that?" Story 25. Lying in bed one night but not asleep, I heard a security camera notification, which around here is usually for an animal. Driveway camera, then backyard camera. I looked on my phone expecting deer, and there were 3 police officers in my backyard and their cars in front of my house. No lights on. Apparently, someone on the street behind me was under the influence of methamphetamine. They had tried to pick him up a few times during the day, but he fled before they arrived. So when they got called again at night, they decided to approach from all sides. Besides his methamphetamine rampage, he had a warrant for something serious. I don't remember if it was assault with a deadly weapon, attempted murder, or another serious charge, but I do remember it was not a minor offense. Story 26. I was sitting at the very back of the bus, on one of those long seats with 5 to 6 spots, while visiting Miami. I looked over and saw a man just 2 seats down engaged in inappropriate behavior. Story 27. I saw a shadow person in a client's house. I told it I didn't want to see it after it completely blocked the light from a window, and that it needed to stop following me around the house. It felt like someone was breathing down my neck constantly before I saw it, but I just brushed it off. Then it stopped. I thought maybe I was just imagining it, until it started turning the bathroom light in the bedroom on and off. There was no one in the house except me and their dogs. When I later told her about it, she acted like it was their familiar spirit, but her face showed she didn't really know about it. A few months later, they cleared the house of clutter, and whatever it was attached to must have been removed. The house is completely clear now. She still thinks something is there and believes attachments are cool. I still refuse to walk in that bedroom. Story 28. On a trip to a South Asian country, I booked a sleeper bus online. When I boarded, the bed was double booked and occupied by another person. All other seats were similarly booked. I had no option but to share the bed. The person was touching me inappropriately whenever there was a speed breaker. I warned him and he apologized. Story 29. Was at the grocery store service desk asking to get some formula from the locked case. I had my body turned slightly away from my cart with my 10-month-old daughter in it, hands still on the cart, when I suddenly realized someone was right behind me. I turned to see a creepy man, who looked like a drug addict, leaning towards my daughter and lifting his arms towards her. When he saw me turn around, he was obviously flustered. All he could mutter before walking away quickly was, "I have always wanted a little girl." He then paced at the ends of all the aisles, putting himself between me and the doors. Every time he saw me, he would stop for a second before resuming his pacing. I was very frightened and called my fiancé, telling him to pick up my daughter and me right at the door. I do not think I even bought anything. Looking back, I wish I had called the police or told a store employee how uncomfortable I felt. At the time, I was only 20 years old and had never considered the risks of child abduction while standing next to my baby. I was doing my best. I will never forget that encounter. Story 30. I took too many mushrooms and thought I was being skinamarinked. It seemed like all the windows, doors, and some of my furniture in my apartment disappeared when I looked away. Story 31. The year before last Christmas, when I was 12 years old, I stayed up because it had started snowing and I wanted to see it. It was around 3 a.m., so you already know things were about to get strange. Some background information. I used to live in a townhouse in the middle of a row, and my room was at the back of the house. Outside my window was a huge bank with lights shining everywhere. There was also a small tree area at the left end of the backyard we shared. As I was looking out the window, I saw an alien running across my backyard out of nowhere. It disappeared into a sewer entrance near the tree area. This sewer entrance was the kind that is raised above ground and not on the side of the street. The creature looked nothing like any animal I had ever seen. It was bald, with a small body, 2 legs, and tiny arms. I joked that it looked like my cousin because it was somewhat human-like, but it was definitely not human. Now, whenever I try to tell someone, I can see in their eyes that they don't believe me or are thinking, "Judah, you were probably just tired." But I know what I saw. I haven't seen it since, and I hope I never will. Story 32. I was at a mud spa in Vietnam. A stranger approached me and started measuring my groin area with his hands, then beckoned me to come into the stall with him. I immediately left. I had no idea what he was doing or what his intentions were. I was probably overthinking it, but it was a strange experience. Story 33. While sitting on the toilet and suffering from a dreadful fever, I glanced down to see lots of tiny pale hands wriggling their way in through the gap in the door. I was not happy about that at all. Story 34. I used to work the closing shift at a gas station. On the side of the building was our public bathroom and a payphone. About 15 minutes before closing, some creep called in saying, "I'm watching you. I'm touching myself thinking of you." That kind of stuff. Before we leave, we are supposed to check that the bathroom door is properly closed, or the wind might blow it open during the night and trigger the alarm system. My thought was, what if he is calling from the payphone next to the bathroom door? No way am I going over there to check it. So I called the police. I did not want them to do anything special. Just be there so I could safely lock up everything and reach my car safely. The police arrived, annoyed at being summoned. I explained what happened. One said, "So, what do you want us to do?" Exactly? As if he had better things to do with his time. I thought to myself, protect and serve. So yes, the police were unhelpful in this situation. Story 35. I was a car hop at Sonic Drive-In at age 12. A man left $100 and a phone number. What the hell? My manager called the police. Story 36. My husband, teenager, baby, and I were sitting downstairs in the living room. Suddenly, we heard a door slam upstairs. It sounded like the wind blowing the door closed. We all went upstairs to check, but no door was closed and no windows were open. A few years ago, we were living in an apartment, having just moved to a new state and town. Our teenager came to visit before she moved in with us. Everything was fine. After she left, cupboards and drawers began opening on their own. A couple of times, the computer would turn on and play loud music in the middle of the night. A few weeks later, something happened with her mother and stepfather, and my husband gained custody. Story 37. When I was about 8 or 9, I used to play with some friends in a drainage ditch near my home. There was a road into our subdivision that passed over the ditch, and we would find frogs, bottle caps, and watch tadpoles. Kid stuff. There was an older kid, around 16 to 18 years old, who would sometimes come over and talk with us. He never gave off any weird vibe. One day, I was alone when he showed up. When I wasn't looking, he dropped his pants and asked me to perform a sexual act on him. I ran straight home and never told anyone. The next time I went, I made sure I had friends with me, but he never came back. Story 38. I do not know about the creepiest, but the most recent experience. I have a man who still creates new social media accounts to try to contact me every time I block him. When I still responded to him, I do not even remember what we were discussing, but I mentioned something about my house. About 15 minutes later, he messaged me about some signs I have outside my house, as if he found my address and came by. Eventually, I blocked him because he started sending very explicit messages. Since then, he has created around 15 to 20 new accounts just to like my posts. Story 39. Years ago, I had to suddenly leave my house because of a mold problem. I took myself and my 2 young daughters, age 2 and 1 at the time, to stay at a cousin's place. We were asleep in a guest room while my cousin had some friends over in her basement. I woke up to a man I had never seen before recording me sleeping. I kicked him so hard in the face that he broke his nose. I never saw him again, and my cousin had no idea who he was or where he came from. Story 40. Years ago, my boyfriend's mother had a party. He lived with her, so we were invited. A 50-something-year-old friend of his mother's showed up and instantly gave me the creeps. I wish I could remember her name, but she was a fairly well-known artist in New Zealand and did set design for Xena, Warrior Princess. I avoided her all night. She became increasingly drunk and started acting very bizarre and aggressive. She eventually lunged and tried to attack my boyfriend's mother for no reason. My boyfriend intervened, and she bit him hard on the shoulder. The police were called, and she spent the night in jail. She never apologized or contacted them again. Very creepy and bizarre. It was like she was possessed. Story 41. Nowhere near the creepy level of some of the comments here, but this is right up there in terms of plain weird and inexplicable. I was helping to run an art stall a year or so ago. A seemingly nice woman came up and we made small talk. Then, matter of fact, she looked me in the eyes and said, "There are a few people in Transylvania from the 1800s I'd like to forget. There was a war." She walked off. There was nothing to have prompted it. Story 42. I was asleep in my apartment where I lived alone at about 22 years old. It was not a great area of town, but I was safety conscious and always locked my doors. I grew up in a worse neighborhood, so the habit was very ingrained. Suddenly, in the middle of the night, I woke up abruptly and sat up very alarmed. After about 30 seconds, I turned on the bedroom light and immediately walked into the living room. The front door was wide open and swinging as if someone had just exited. Nothing was missing. I know I had locked it. There was no wind or weather that could have opened the door, even if it had been unlocked. I never leave doors unlocked. Never. And I never wake up like that unless my cat is vomiting, and I did not have a cat at that time. I think my sudden sitting up startled someone who had jimmied the door or had a key, and they made a quick exit. Story 43. Almost 20 years ago, it was around 10 or 11 o'clock at night. My former husband and I were walking a couple of miles home from a wine tasting. We were slightly buzzed, but definitely not drunk. We followed the sidewalk up a hill, and there were no lights. It was lightly misting, and there was no one else around. Suddenly, a middle-aged woman with big glasses and wild hair appeared out of nowhere and said, "I need some help with my mother." Ultimately, we were somewhat foolish and followed her. It turned out her very elderly mother was locked out of her nursing home. I had no idea what she wanted us to do, but it was extremely creepy. Story 44. A moderator on the Trump subreddit called me an offensive name in a thread, then sent me a private message insulting me, and then muted me on the subreddit. Story 45. A friend of my ex had lived about 5 minutes down the street from me. We barely knew each other than me going with him and his friends, who were my brother and my ex, to go DoorDash. After my ex went to prison, he began blowing up my phone, texting me and trying to call me. I figured he was just lonely, as he never came off as wanting to be with me or seemed attracted to me or anything like that. One night, I was sitting in my house on a chair in front of my window, which I had opened to get some fresh air. Before laying down to sleep, I had a gut instinct to shut and lock the window, but I ignored my intuition and laid down instead. Later that night, the same guy who was formerly friends with my brother and ex had walked to my house and stared at me as I was asleep in my bed. I found this out later. I moved out unexpectedly the next day. He had offered to come to my cousin's apartment, where I had recently started living after moving out of my home because I didn't want to live alone, and pay me my cut of the money we had made DoorDashing with my brother a week prior because it had finally hit his bank account. I agreed. He arrived at the apartment and, to my surprise, gave me no money. He stayed the night without asking, and I didn't want to be rude. I figured maybe he was just tired or forgetful, so I left him asleep on the couch. When I woke up the next morning, I was instantly annoyed to find he was still there. I spent the whole day trying to hint to him that I wanted him to leave. He either didn't catch my numerous hints or just didn't care. Being the kind of person I was at the time, I didn't want to be confrontational or seem rude because he had been nice to me. That second day, he began being a little touchy, and I had to let him know I wasn't okay with that. At this point, my cousin and I were upset and determined to have him leave. But again, my weakness at the time was my kind heart, so I told her he would definitely be leaving the next day. That night, all three of us were sitting on the couch watching TV. My cousin and I fell asleep on separate sides of the sectional, and the guy was in the middle. He invited two separate people over without our knowledge. When we woke up, he had a friend outside whom I barely knew and claimed wanted to ask me something, but I turned him down and told him to keep them outside and not to bring anyone to my new address. My cousin and I fell back asleep. Later, my cousin woke up in the middle of the night and saw me passed out on the couch with the guy touching and groping me in my sleep without my knowledge and pressing into me. My cousin instantly told him off and said he needed to find a way home soon. She woke me up and had me sleep in her locked room. The next morning, she told me what had happened and what she woke up to. We weren't playing anymore. I ended up paying $10 to Uber him to his uncle's because it was the only way I could get him to leave. He asked me to come with him and I refused. Before the Uber even pulled off, he texted me saying he didn't want me talking to any other guys and that he loved me. I instantly felt uncomfortable and ignored him. He began blowing up my phone, begging for me to get him a ride home from his uncle's. Being ignorant and kind-hearted, I asked how much it would cost for him to get home. He told me $10. I sent him $10 and hoped he would leave me alone. After some time, I checked my phone and saw a mixed text message from him with the location of his Uber. I clicked on it and realized he was coming back to my apartment. I told him off and spent another $10 to Uber him back to his actual address. I even had another Uber waiting for him by the time he stepped out of his current ride. After this, I blocked him. Later, I found out I was missing $30 in cash. So, long story short, I lost $60 dealing with harassment and stalking. After I blocked him, he texted my cousin's number begging to come back over. When she told him off, he said, "I know your back door doesn't lock." And, "I know your back door is open." At the time, the back door was indeed open. He told my cousin he would climb up the 3-story balcony just to get to me. She threatened him with police action and blocked him after this. He began calling both of us from no-caller identification for a week straight and made multiple fake social media accounts on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok to stalk my private profiles and send me harassing messages from the fake pages. He ended up texting me from a fake account, threatening to kill me. That's when I called the police, filed charges, and got a protection order. He was thankfully arrested for harassment, stalking, and intimidation for the acts he committed against me. He told me how he walked to my house at 3 a.m. one night, the night I left my window open. When he got there, he didn't knock and instead went to my window, standing there for a while watching me sleep. He told me my dog didn't bark or growl at him but had woken up and stared at him. He described the color of the blanket I was covered with, how I had rolled over and pulled the blanket off my arms, how I briefly woke up because of constant phone calls from someone, and how I pushed the phone away, answering briefly before hanging up. I have no idea how long he watched me that night, but it's the creepiest experience I have ever had. My kind heart and not wanting to hurt his feelings resulted in me getting stalked, harassed, threatened, groped, and losing $60. He groped me numerous times while I was awake and, from what my cousin saw, in my sleep as well. After he left, he had stayed 2.5 days straight. I felt weird and sick for 5 days afterward. Thinking back, I did feel tired and slept a lot the whole time he was around. I wonder if he drugged me and wanted to do worse. At least I'll never find out and never have to encounter him again. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.